Now then, how you doing? I hope you're well. Well, it's that time of year, season of mists and mellow fruitfulness and all that, when the trees burst forth with all their vibrant gorgeousness. Keats, eat your heart out. But having 4 seasons in a year means us artists have always got something to look forward to. It would be difficult to pick out a favourite amongst them. Each comes with their own charms. As I get older, I'm simply grateful for each new season as it comes around. Well, autumn colours are generally warm and, if coupled with bright sunlight, can be quite intense. I rather like the earlier part of the season when summer trees are just on the turn. Well, full-blown autumnal foliage can of course be quite spectacular, but then as the season fades away to winter, so the wind whips away the last few leaves from the trees amidst a feeling of brooding melancholy. Well, that's quite enough of that. Let's take a look at some of the ways we can depict autumn in a watercolour landscape. If I'm ever asked which is my least favourite colour, my answer is always green. Naturally, as a landscape artist, this is a bit of a handicap since I'm confronted by it at almost every turn. Autumn, of course, is the perfect antidote, with its warm hues and hint of decaying vegetation. But what makes a good autumn landscape? It's worth noting that there are degrees of autumnalness. Yes, there is such a word. I just invented it. The onset of autumn will almost certainly vary depending upon where you live. Where I live in the north of England, the trees start to turn around about mid-September or earlier. To illustrate that subtle change, I've mixed up a light green from cadmium yellow and Prussian blue to paint my basic tree shape. To suggest a hint of autumn is relatively easy. While the green is still damp, all I need to do is simply drop a small amount of red into its outer edges. Here I've used cadmium red, but you could also use alizarin crimson. The beauty of doing this wet in wet is that it keeps the effect subtle. Another colour worth adding to your autumn palette is burnt umber. I'm just going to add a few more trees with the green, then I'm going to drop the burnt umber into the foliage as before. It's the same effect, but with a slightly different result. When you've got lots of trees together, sometimes it's necessary to differentiate between them. To complete the scene, I need to mix up a dark tone for the tree trunks and branches. For this, I'm mixing up burnt umber and French ultramarine, my go-to mix for almost all of my most intense tones. Well, it could use some finesse, but hopefully you get the general idea. The most important thing to remember when you're painting in branches, by the way, is that there needs to be good continuity. If a branch disappears into the foliage and reappears a little higher up or further out, then we must believe that it's all part of the same branch. All it needs now are a few shadows. These are also mixed from French ultramarine, with a tiny amount of burnt umber added. The shadows help to give extra three-dimensional shape to the foliage and a little more realism to the scene. The most important thing is to be consistent. Think about where your light is coming from and how it's going to impact upon the elements of the composition. So if the light is coming from the right, then the shadows need to be down the left-hand side of the trees, for example. Shadows falling on the ground should follow and help to visually explain its contours. I love to see trees on the turn as we shift our seasonal gears from summer into autumn. The days get shorter and the temperature starts to drop. Autumn also means misty mornings. One of the best ways to give your trees a misty feel is to paint them as part of a wet in wet wash. Here I've dropped French ultramarine onto a damp surface, suggesting tree shapes and distant field boundaries. Having established those general shapes, I'm now dropping burnt umber into the wash, along with small amounts of cadmium yellow and cadmium red. Part of the fun of this is that I don't need to be precise. It's all about creating an impression of trees and leaving as much as I can to the viewer's imagination. I've decided I'd rather like a farmhouse in there somewhere, so I've lifted a vague farmhouse-like shape out of the wash with a piece of tissue while it's still damp. It's just a small matter of adding a few shadows to give it shape and a couple of windows. To complete the scene, I'm going to add a little colour to the foreground using raw sienna and French ultramarine for more shadows. There are many different ways to paint an autumn scene, just as there are many different moods, emotions and effects associated with the season. During spring and summer, leaves work tirelessly to feed the trees. That food-making process takes place in the leaf cells containing chlorophyll, which gives the leaf its green colour. It's the chlorophyll that does all the work, absorbing energy from sunlight, which in turn is used to transform carbon dioxide and water to carbohydrates. I know all this because I just Googled it. In the autumn, it is a combination of the changes in daylight and temperature that causes the leaves to stop their food-making process. The chlorophyll breaks down, the green colour disappears, and the yellow and orange colours become visible. How lucky are we to live on a planet where all this happens as a natural matter of course. In this final autumnal example, I want to show the colours of autumn in all their spectacular glory. I'm painting wet on dry, but encouraging the cadmium yellow and cadmium red to fuse together as randomly as possible. I'm throwing some green in there too, mixed from cadmium yellow, Prussian blue and burnt umber. Working on dry paper means that I can shape my foliage and leave hard edges and highlights as I go along. I'm painting the blue of the background with Prussian blue, leaving a small highlight around the edges of the outer leaves, giving them a backlit contre-jour effect.
It's all slightly chaotic, but I hope you can see where I'm going with this. By dropping French ultramarine into the wash while it's still damp, I'm hoping I can suggest distant trees lurking in the mist. In watercolour, we work from light to dark. This means that any light tones or bright colours need to be carefully preserved as the painting develops. There are ways in which such preservation of highlights might be guaranteed, such as using masking fluid, for instance. I'm making this up as I go along, however, so the result is fairly loose and slightly unpredictable. As such, the process is deliberately spontaneous. Masking fluid would take some of that spontaneity away. It might make it a little tidier though. So there are several things that we can do to reinforce an autumnal mood. Warm colours, naturally, are the key elements. Yellows, reds and browns all help to establish an autumnal context. Another key ingredient is mist. Painting trees wet in wet helps to create a hint of mystery and a subdued mood. Let's not forget the wind. As the leaves turn to brown, so the wind whips them away and deposits them as a carpet of colour at the base of the trees and along the verges of tracks and roads. A smattering of leaves in mid-flight can really help to animate a scene. Finally, colours are nothing without light. Sunlight enhances the colours of the foliage and creates shadows that can be engineered to make the composition as visually interesting as possible.
Well, as the redbreast whistles from a garden croft and gathering swallows twitter in the skies, I hope you enjoyed that little foray into the autumn. Make the most of it. Winter is coming. Until next time, take care.